In the heart of Babylon, at the very height of his power, this seemingly invincible conqueror was suddenly struck down, not by a spear in some glorious battle, but by a mysterious illness that destroyed his body over 12 agonizing days. It started with a fever and a sudden cry of pain after a banquet, and ended with a man so completely paralyzed he couldn't even speak. He was a prisoner in his own body as his entire empire held its breath. Now, while ancient accounts do talk about disease, the circumstances just feel a little too perfect, the timing a bit too convenient. The evidence points not to some random sickness, but to something far more sinister. A chillingly sophisticated assassination plot, orchestrated by traitors lurking in his own inner circle. A betrayal so deep it wouldn't just end his life, it would shatter his world forever. He was more than a man. In his own lifetime, he was already a myth. Alexander the Great. By the time he was 33, he was the undisputed master of the known world, the architect of an empire stretching from the shores of Greece to the mountains of India. He was a military genius, undefeated in battle, a king who had brought the Persian Empire to its knees, and a leader his men practically worshipped. He stood at the absolute pinnacle of power, looking out at a world he had conquered, with plans for even greater glories already in motion. And then, it was all over. To even get to the conspiracy, you have to understand the man at the center of it all. In 323 BC, Alexander wasn't just a king. He was a global phenomenon. He'd spent the last decade on a relentless campaign, dismantling the mighty Persian Empire piece by piece. His victories at Granicus, Issus, and Gaugamela were already the stuff of legend. He had marched his armies across deserts, over mountains, and through hostile lands where no European commander had ever dared to go. But he wasn't just a conqueror, he was a creator. He founded over 70 cities, many named Alexandria, seeding Greek culture across a huge expanse of the globe. He dreamed of a unified world, a fusion of East and West. He even started bringing Persian soldiers and customs into his army, a move that, while visionary, was deeply resented by some of his oldest Macedonian veterans. They watched him adopt the lavish dress and divine pretensions of the very kings he'd overthrown. He started demanding prostration, the act of bowing to the floor before him, a custom his men felt was reserved for gods. To his loyal Macedonians, who saw their king as the first among equals, this was a deeply alienating shift. Alexander, the son of Philip, was starting to act a whole lot like Alexander, the son of Zeus. His ambition was simply boundless. After a decade of war, you'd think he'd be ready for a break. Not Alexander. From his new capital in Babylon, he was already drawing up plans for his next epic campaign, a massive naval expedition to conquer the Arabian Peninsula. After that, his gaze was set westward, toward Carthage, Sicily, and the distant shores of Spain. He dreamed of a global empire, and he had the army and the treasury to make it happen. He was 33 years old, and in his mind he was just getting started. It was this unstoppable drive, this relentless ambition, that may have sealed his fate. Because for some, the only way to stop the man who would conquer the world was to remove him from it. The end began, as it so often did in Alexander's life, with a party. According to ancient court journals, Alexander attended a banquet and, after a long night of drinking, was invited to a private party with his companion, Medius of Larissa. He drank more, and one account from the historian Diodorus claims that after downing a large bowl of unmixed wine, he suddenly cried out as if he'd been stabbed. What came next was a slow, terrifying downward spiral. The royal diaries, if you believe them, painstakingly documented his decline. The day after the party, a fever took hold. He was moved to the bathhouse to cool down, but it raged through the night. For the next several days, a grim routine began. He'd be carried on a litter to perform the daily sacrifices, a duty he refused to abandon even as his body failed him. He'd try to give orders to his officers for the upcoming Arabian campaign, his mind still laser-focused on the future as his body betrayed him. But his condition just got worse. The fever became a constant, burning fire. That initial sharp pain morphed into a severe, deep abdominal agony. He was hit with chills and sweats, all classic signs of a major infection. Soon, he couldn't walk. Then, paralysis began to creep through his body. Within a week, he was unable to speak, only able to communicate with his eyes. By most accounts, his mind stayed sharp, trapped inside a body that was shutting down. His loyal soldiers, hearing their king was on his deathbed, became desperate. They demanded to see him one last time. The generals finally relented, and the palace doors were thrown open. Silently, one by one, the veterans of 100 battles filed past his bed, weeping as they looked upon their once unbeatable commander, now a helpless, speechless figure. He was still conscious enough to acknowledge each of them with a glance or a slight nod. He lingered like this for 12 days. Then, on the evening of June 10th or 11th, 323 BC, Alexander the Great, conqueror of the world, was dead. For centuries, the most accepted historical view, backed by ancient writers like Plutarch and Arrian, was that Alexander simply died from a deadly disease. Babylon in the summer was a breeding ground for sickness, and several compelling medical theories have been put forward. The top contenders are malaria and typhoid fever. Both were common in ancient Babylon, and their symptoms, high fever, chills, exhaustion, and abdominal pain, match the descriptions in the royal diaries pretty well. A 1998 University of Maryland study even concluded that typhoid fever was the most likely culprit, noting that death often occurs about 2 weeks after symptoms start, which fits Alexander's timeline perfectly. Another theory points to West Nile virus. Believers in this idea highlight a strange omen recorded by Plutarch. Just before Alexander entered Babylon, he supposedly saw a flock of ravens fighting in the sky, with some falling dead at his feet. A mass death of birds is a known sign of a West Nile outbreak, and the neurological symptoms like paralysis are consistent with Alexander's final days. More recently, a truly fascinating idea was suggested by Dr. Catherine Hall. She proposed that Alexander might have had Guillain Barre syndrome, GBS, a rare autoimmune disorder where the immune system attacks the nerves. GBS can cause a fast-moving, symmetrical paralysis, which sounds a lot like the accounts of his decline. And crucially, this theory could explain one of the most baffling details about his death: the ancient claim that his body didn't decompose for 6 days. Hall suggests this wasn't a sign he was a god, but a sign he wasn't actually dead. GBS can cause such deep paralysis and shallow breathing that in an era before doctors checked for a pulse, he could have been declared dead while still alive, trapped in a coma. If that's true, it would be the most famous case of misdiagnosed death in all of history. But what if it wasn't a disease? What if the timing was just too perfect? Alexander dies at the exact moment his generals have had enough of war, on the eve of a new, difficult campaign they desperately want to avoid. The pieces fit a much darker puzzle, a brilliantly executed assassination. So, who wanted him dead? The disturbing answer is, well, pretty much everyone in his inner circle. The prime suspect, named in many ancient sources, is Antipater, the powerful and respected general who ruled Macedonia as Alexander's regent. For years, Antipater had kept the home front secure, but his relationship with Alexander had soured. Antipater was an old-school Macedonian, and he was not a fan of Alexander's new Persian customs or his claims to be a god. The final straw came when Alexander, possibly pushed by his mother Olympias, who hated Antipater, summoned the old general to Babylon to be relieved of his command. For a man like Antipater, this probably felt like a death sentence. Did he decide to strike first? The theory goes that Antipater didn't act alone. He sent his son, Cassander, to Babylon. Cassander was said to have a deep-seated fear and hatred of Alexander. The plan, as the rumors tell it, was for Cassander to bring a deadly poison to Babylon. And the cupbearer who served Alexander at that fateful party, that was Iolaus, another of Antipater's sons. The motive, the means, and the opportunity all point to one family. But the conspiracy might have stretched even further into the highest intellectual circles of Greece. Some ancient, though highly speculative, accounts even implicate the great philosopher Aristotle. Aristotle was Alexander's childhood tutor, but they'd grown apart. Alexander had executed Aristotle's nephew for refusing to perform prostration and suspecting him in another plot. On top of that, Aristotle was a close friend of Antipater. Could the philosopher, a man who knew the secrets of botany and medicine, have provided the knowledge, or even the poison, to get rid of a former student he now saw as a tyrant? And then, of course, there were the generals. Men like Ptolemy, Seleucus, and Perdiccas. They were brilliant commanders, but they were also tired. They'd been fighting for a decade, won unbelievable wealth, and were ready to enjoy it. Alexander's bottomless appetite for more conquest was a direct threat to their own ambitions. They wanted to rule their own kingdoms, not march to Arabia. His death was the starting gun that let them do just that. The moment he was gone, they fell on his empire like wolves, tearing it apart in 40 years of brutal civil war. This immediate collapse of the empire is maybe the strongest circumstantial evidence of all. His death wasn't just the end of a king. It was the beginning of their own reigns. They didn't mourn the empire. They divided it. If it was murder, the assassins chose their weapon with diabolical genius. The poison had to be subtle, its effects mimicking a natural disease to avoid immediate suspicion. The ancient world had plenty of fast-acting poisons, like hemlock, but Alexander's 12-day decline doesn't fit that profile. Modern research has zeroed in on a chillingly plausible culprit: Veratrum album, also known as white hellebore. According to toxicologist Dr. Leo Shep, who has studied the case extensively, wine fermented with white hellebore would produce symptoms that are a near-perfect match for the ancient accounts. It would start with sudden, severe abdominal and chest pain. Crucially, it causes a slow, progressive muscular weakness, leading to paralysis, while the victim stays conscious, exactly what was reported to have happened to Alexander. It killed slowly, painfully, and in a way that could easily be mistaken for a disease. Another, more speculative theory suggests the conspirators used water from the mythical river Styx. This isn't just legend. The Styx was a real toxic river in Greece. Some geologists have theorized this water might have contained a powerful bacterium called Callichaamicin, which causes cell death and organ failure over several days. Another slow, agonizing death that fits the timeline. Legend even claimed the water was so corrosive it had to be carried in a mule's hoof. A strange detail that actually appears in the conspiracy accounts of Cassander bringing the poison. The killers had access to weapons that were sophisticated, deadly, and perfectly suited to hide their crime in plain sight. When the announcement finally came, shock and grief rolled across the empire. Macedonians and Persians alike mourned the man who had been their incredible king. But behind the public tears, a frantic power struggle was already underway. On his deathbed, when asked who he left his vast empire to, Alexander is said to have whispered, "To the strongest." Whether he actually said it or not, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. He left behind a pregnant wife, Roxane, and no designated adult heir. His empire, held together by nothing more than the sheer force of his personality, immediately began to crack. His generals, the Diadochi or successors, wasted no time. The first war of the Diadochi erupted almost immediately. The next 40 years were a chaotic storm of shifting alliances, betrayals, and constant war, as each general fought for his piece of the prize. Alexander's own family was systematically eliminated. His wife Roxane and his son, Alexander IV, born after his death, were murdered on the orders of Cassander, the son of the main suspect, Antipater. His mother, Olympias, was also executed. By the time the dust settled, the dream of a unified world was gone forever. In its place stood three major Hellenistic kingdoms: the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire in Asia, and the Antigonid dynasty in Macedon. Alexander had conquered the world, but his death made sure no single person would ever rule it again. The conspiracy, if it existed, was a staggering success. It didn't just kill the king, it cleared the board for his assassins and rivals to become kings themselves. So, how does a man who conquered the known world, a man undefeated in battle, die so suddenly in the prime of his life? Was it a random act of nature, a fever, a virus, or a rare neurological disorder? Or was his agonizing death the final move in a masterful conspiracy, hatched by the very men he trusted most? A plot by generals who feared his ambition and a regent who feared for his life. What do you think was the secret that killed Alexander the Great? Let us know your theory in the comments below. And if you want to uncover more of history's greatest unsolved mysteries, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. The body of Alexander the Great was never found. After being preserved, it was hijacked by Ptolemy and taken to Egypt, where it was displayed for centuries before vanishing from history. Without it, the mystery of his death can never be truly solved by modern forensics. His legacy is twofold: the Hellenistic world he created through his incredible conquests, and the enduring riddle of his death. He was a man who became a god, only to die a very human death. Or perhaps a death that was all too human in its design. The secret, like his tomb, remains lost to the ages, a final chilling mystery in the epic story of Alexander the Great.